All right, welcome back to another Let's Build with JavaScript. This is going to be focusing on vanilla JavaScript. And if you've been following along, I can't thank you enough. This has been a learning experience for me, and hopefully it is for you too. So the subject video or subject context of this video is going to be about a kind of a show more, show less toggle within a body copy of a section of content on a page. And a lot of times you'll see this on just various portions of a site that will kind of just save space in the end. There's nothing really too advanced, but what I want to introduce in this video is more of an object-oriented approach towards doing something with JavaScript, even as simple as this, which is kind of just toggling state. Even so, it's can be an advance, and it's more so just because we're going to use some object notation in JavaScript, but the whole purpose is to be more reusable and write cleaner code, so we can maybe repurpose this with things elsewhere on a site or an app we're using. So I'm going to start basically with the markup, which is going to be pretty simple, and then some styles. By default, I picked this off my demo pen that I created before. It's a giant SVG background that has this kind of topographic, I think it's called, style. And I just went ahead and put that in there. Feel free to steal this from the code pen that I'll share in the description or on my blog. From there, you can go ahead and build this along with me, or just follow along and review as I code this. So to get started, I'll start with the markup. And like I said, it's going to be fairly standard. We'll start just with scaffolding what the markup will look like, and then we'll go back with the CSS and make it look all nice and fancy, which is pretty much what I do during the day. I'm more of a front-end designer, so a lot of this deals with that kind of structure and making things, the user experience more sound and whatnot. So here I go. So each block, think of it's going to be kind of like a blog post format. So each one will have a title of some type and a paragraph, for instance, and each one's going to be contained in a content div, which I'll mostly use for styling. The real thing we're going to focus on is the paragraph tag here. So we're going to add a couple classes that are going to make this all work the way we want. So I'm going to call this JS Excerpt, and the reason I'm doing that and passing JS first is to, at least for my own code, I like to remind myself that this class coincides with some JavaScript I'll be using to target it. And that helps if other people are working in the code and they know your pattern, they can, kind of identify that, or at least adhere to, asking you why that is the way it is. So I'll just put dummy content for now, probably a couple of paragraphs. If you just type lorem in CodePen and then hit tab, it'll go ahead and autocomplete some dummy text. And then below the p tag, I want to add a button. Well, it's going to be a tag, but I won't use the href. I just want it to be kind of a roll of button. You can put an href there and just have that if you want. But yeah, so if you don't have that though, you don't have to worry about much of the prevent default stuff, but we can add that just for grins. I don't think I did in my demo, so I'll go ahead and do it now just to verify it works later. So this will end up being, it'll have a class of JS again, and then show more. And then within that, we're going to just have show more text. So that's essentially a content block. What we'll do is actually wrap, each block will be its own entity. So we'll actually do this about 3 times, maybe a space in between each so we know which one ends and starts. So right now it looks pretty hideous because we have no styles. So let's add those next. I did add a class called Excerpt hidden, which will again be a CSS targeting thing that will toggle with JavaScript. It might make sense to have this JS Excerpt hidden too if you're doing, because I am going to target it with JavaScript, but I'm only targeting the class name just to swap it with another one. So it's something that's maybe confusing about the way I work. But anyway, I'll shut up. So next, let's add the CSS, and this will be just my own take on what this could look like. It's nothing perfect, but let me start with the content or the main container below the body tag, this giant SVG here. So container will be something like this. We'll just set a max width of pretty narrow since this is all that's on the page. In a real world situation, you probably make that wider. I'm going to use rem units just because. So that goes ahead and shuffles everything to the center. And I'll nest a block class inside that. And we'll do some padding just to kind of shape this stuff up a bit. I want to give it kind of a background with some shadow just to kind of pull it off the page over top of this pattern so it looks nicer and more legible. So we have border radius, which we don't have border yet, but we'll add one. And I'll do a margin. I'll just do margin bottom for rim. Box shadow. I kind of went just off the cuff with some of these colors and whatnot. So if you want to use your own, definitely feel free. Let's see. I use 613 B1F and then 0.2 opacity. So Rgba, it stands for each thing. With Sass, you can pass in just the hex code and it'll compile down. For traditional CSS, you'd actually want to enter 3 codes that are comma separated. That's the Rgb. We'll give it a background of white, which is the only thing it's missing right now. So let's do white, and there we should go. So that's the gist of how it should look. I'm going to make it look a little more nice with the content class. So we'll just target that as well. Content class is right within the block class, if you see it there. The block is simply there to add some cushioning and give it a background color and a box shadow. The content will actually dictate how the content will look. So I'm going to go ahead and assign the font family to be a serif typeface. So we'll do Lucida, I think it's called, right? Georgia. Serif. So if you're new to CSS, which maybe you're more of a back-end guy or something like that, it's totally cool. These are fallbacks. So you start with the first font, and if that doesn't exist on the user's computer, they'll go to the next one. And you can add basically how many you want here. I can't type though. Georgia. Oh my gosh. And then it ultimately will fall back to a serif, which is just whatever the current user has for a serif on their system. In most cases, there's some safe ones. You can Google those. None of them are awesome to work with, but so they can be used to their best ability as like a system default. I think GitHub might use something like that, where they use their own font stack that's based on system fonts, so they don't have to load any fonts, which kind of is a good performance thing. Just random details there for you. Okay, so there we go. I increased the font size, the line height, and I added some margin on the actual content div, just so it's kind of setting off from the bottom. And then we'll target the heading as well. We can just target it by its tag. And by default, it's got some basic margin by default given by the browser. So we'll go ahead and turn that off, margin bottom, or we'll just reconfig that basically. Let's do a half rim. Actually, we could just do margin. So this will be margin top and bottom will be a half rim, and then we'll do 0 on the left and right. That kind of just makes it a little tighter. And then finally, within this tag, we'll have appearance. Basically, we want the link to not really look like a link, but more like a button. So let's do appearance none. I originally started with an actual button element, so some of these styles might pertain more to that rather than the link. So it's whatever. I don't need that actually. So background will be white. And let's see, color. 2779BD. Let's see, display. I'm going to use Inline Flex. It's kind of a new way I do buttons. It allows you to align things within the button. Say you had an icon next to it or something, you can really easily position things without having to do any weird position relative stuff on the things within a button, like I said, an icon. But it has its good and bad sides too, so to each his own. You'll want to set like a hard height is kind of one of those bad sides. But you could use padding. I think this varies from developer to developer. They use their own methods. So I won't set any pattern because I'm setting a height, but I will set some padding on the right and left. So 14 pixels. We'll adjust the font size to be 14. Border radius of 3 pixels. And border 1 pixel solid, and then we'll use that same color as before. We could use a variable there, but I'm not scaling this by any means, so it's okay to duplicate yourself. 9BD. There we go. Looks like I maybe don't have border radius. Yeah, this should be radius. Cool, and we'll actually text decoration none, and we'll make the font family, we'll just do, I'll leave it alone, it's okay as is. All right, cool. So that is the A. What I want to do on hover is make it semi fill the background just a little bit, nothing crazy. We also want to make sure it's a pointer, which it should be by default. Yeah, okay. Cool. So the background will just change here subtly. We'll do a hash of 277. Again, I'm using the same color again. 9BD, and then we'll comma separate that to just be a 0.1. So subtly it'll fill on hover, which is what we're after. Cool. So that could be enhanced and look way cooler, but I'm going to leave it alone. And then finally, I'm going to have some classes that we'll use for some of our actual manipulation. So Excerpt hidden is actually going to make these paragraphs have a set height for now. So we'll say forem overflow hidden. And position relative. This is my own little trick just to do some fading, make it look like it is got more content than just being, stripped off like that. So that we can do and after with Sass and have a content. This is a pseudo element, so you need to set a content of nothing or whatever you want there, and it'll display. I'm going to just do nothing, and this be position absolute. So the way this works, it's actually kind of hard to explain. This needs to be set to relative, the actual element itself. And then you have these pseudo selectors that can come before and after the same element that you can at least define some effects or patterns or whatever you want to do. Often I'll do borders or just subtle design accents to do things there, or shadows. You can really do a lot with these. It's kind of neat. So bottom we need to set there. Left will be 0. Width will be 100. So it'll span the full width. We'll set a definite height. And then the background is going to be a gradient. And this is going to be a linear one. And what I'll start with is to bottom. And this might not work 100% in your browser. I just did it, off the cuff. So feel free to find a generator of some sort or something that has the prefixes for every browser. And most WebKit stuff, this should work, I think. But I'm in Firefox right now, and it works for me even. So I'm going to do to bottom, and then we'll do 2 of these. So Rgba. And it'll be 255, 255, 255, basically doing a transparent gradient of white to a full color white at 100%. So 0 to 100. And it kind of does this effect that we're seeing, or we'll see here. I think I did this wrong. Yeah, I need that comment there. There we go. So it looks like it's kind of, ending in a sense. Let's give and take. That works. So, okay, that's going to end up being how we do our styles. There's one more class that I'm going to add that will be our visibility class. So excerpt visible, and this will just be a height of auto and overflow. So once the visibility is toggled, this will end up making that height full width, and then we'll toggle the state of this button as well. All right, so that wraps up our CSS. The next step, of course, which you probably came here for, is the JavaScript. And I'm going to approach this a little bit different than normal. I hope it makes sense for you, but essentially we're going to do what we normally do, but we're going to try to extract away a lot of the logic into more reusable components. And the way I like to do that, or I've learned so far, is to create my own objects that are purposeful. So each object is going to be something that is responsible for one thing. It may have sub functions or methods that do one thing, like say add a class or remove a class. It's the same thing you'd write CSS maybe. So if you created a class that just created a box shadow or something, or floated just left and that's all it did, it's kind of the same concept. But with JavaScript, you can pass arguments through and modify specific things. So it makes it in a way more reusable, allowing you to do more with smaller amounts of code rather than going and diving in the DOM, creating custom code as you go, and just bloating your code base basically. So essentially start with utility-based object, which is going to be responsible for toggling classes. And I'm kind of doing this backwards. I wish I had my old code where I started, and it's kind of where you would expect. You kind of get all the elements you need, you query for them, you do the logic you need to do, but then you start to extract it away. So after time, you start to use these things where you start to ask yourself, I should say, how can I make this reusable? And this is what I ended up with. So this might, your mileage may vary with this, and it could be even more enhanced for sure. But this is a way within one file to do something that I found to be more reusable. So first, let me start with this. So we're going to create a new object called utils, or utilities for short, and it'll be equal to an empty object to start, and every object you want to end with a semicolon. Inside that, you can have methods. So within each method, you can assign a name. So I'll do first one called add class. Within an object, you need a colon to separate the logic from the actual key value. So the way this would work is to be a function and that. The way you would access this normally would be like utils.add class. And then you could do whatever logic or target something inside there. And that's the object kind of approach. So it's always dot something as opposed to just passing things through a function or creating a bunch of spaghetti code, as they call it, which is just a bunch of functions that you have to reference throughout your code. So here, think of what you could do down the line. Maybe this is in another file. And with the ES6, which I have Babel loaded, you could do like an import utils from, whatever it is. So utils.js. Since this is a pen, I don't have multi-file system going on, so it would be kind of something like that. But we're not going to work that way yet. I will get to stuff like that soon. But this is more of an approach to do a single file in that same manner. So what we'll do is create a reusable utility class. And this is going to have all the components that we may reuse in our code later on, or what we think we might reuse. So say I want to add a class, typically you would get your element, say, I don't know, var element equals document query selector, my element. This is all just demo stuff. My element. And then you would take your element, you would say class list, add, and then, whatever class, my class, and then you might do something else with the element. So that's great and it works, but then this is just kind of sporadic code all over the place. But what if you could pass in those things, say the selector you're targeting, and then what class you want to add to a function, and just automatically do that for any new add class situation you need. So that looks something like this. You would take an element, and these are just arguments, so these don't exist, but you can pass them in and you can call them what you want. So I'm going to call this the class, which is probably a terrible name. And then we could take the element, which is again the argument we pass in. We're going to do the same kind of thing we did before, the class, but now we have this as a reusable thing. So if later I want to add class to, maybe I'll just target something right now, like I'll target container right now. So I'll say utils dot add class element will be container, and then the class will be, well, actually we'll need to do a query for this first. So you could just do document.query selector container. If you want to do it all in line like that, you might make a variable if you want. And then you could add the class, my class, and then save or whatever you're working in. And then we should be able to see this in our container. Inspect this thing. There it is. You see it right there in my source code. So that works as we predicted. Now this isn't fancy syntax. It's just doing stuff in a more reusable way. So what we'll end up doing is setting a variable probably, and then passing that through just because, but we'll keep going from here. So I'm going to make one for remove class too. And you notice in here, we comma separate these. So you'll just do that going forward. So remove class. And then we'll do the same thing, element, the class. So element dot class list dot remove the class. Very cool. And then finally, we'll add, most of the logic we're going to go for here is the show more utility. So this is something you would probably reuse in other areas of the app, maybe if you need it. So what we'll end up doing is another function. We'll pass the element. You can call it L. You can call it anything right here. I'll do element just to keep it consistent, and excerpt. Pass that through. So this will do a lot more logic, but it's going to be responsible for quite a few things. So that's kind of why. And you can always do more functions in here, whatever you want to do. So it's totally up to you how big you want these to be. If they're crazy lots of logic inside these, it might make sense. You might find yourself needing to maybe extract the other things within these to basically target them. And what's cool is a way, I'll show you in a second, how you can target the self with what will seem like a class-based thing, even though JavaScript doesn't have classes. You can target the utility object itself to use these functions on itself, as opposed to doing that all from scratch within. So that's the kind of the beauty of it there as well. So I'll take the element and I'll add an event listener. Like even the click event, I could extract this into something else and, make it its own method. But for brevity, I'm going to keep this short and sweet, I think. So then we can pass the event. And using ES6, we can do fancy stuff like this. Don't even need to wrap it in a parentheses or anything. What I want to do, though, is get the event target, which is going to end up being the button. And I want to get that text from that button because we want to toggle this text when we hit this button, as well as the state of the height of this area. So what we end up doing is doing a const link text. Let's call it that. And we'll get the event target, which is basically hooking into the event wherever you clicked and grabbing the target of that, and then text content. So right now, if I console log this on click, and right now it wouldn't work because we need to actually fire that function. So we don't have an element to do yet. So we'll have to kind of do this on the limb. So do utils.showMore, and then we could do document.query selector. Let's say, I don't know, JS button, show more. So this is going to kind of be funky because there's multiple show mores on the page. So we'll see how this works. But then we'll do the excerpt, which is going to be JS excerpt. Okay, and what I'll do maybe hopefully avoid errors is remove a few of these. We can always duplicate them later. Okay, so we can hopefully open the console and just see something happen. Doesn't look like it did though. So let's do event.prevent default. And it didn't happen because I also didn't type that right. But let's also do a prevent default. And it's element. I'm so used to E, or it's event, excuse me. All right, try once more. Hopefully this works. There it is. So we get the text content, which is literally the text within these whatever they're called, of the HTML, which is what we want. But I also want to make sure there's no, way this could be manipulated even with CSS or anything. So we can actually manipulate it with JavaScript so it comes through on our terms. And you could do that, just say to lowercase, just so we know if that ever gets changed, we'll make sure it comes through. And this could obviously be more fail-safe. So I wanted to make sure at least that bit was strict. Knowing that it will say show more is a whole nother issue. I won't really deal with that because we're going to check against if it is that text right now. So we'll say if link text is equal to double equals, we'll make sure it's show more. And within that, we'll have an if else scenario. So what this is going to end up doing is toggling the state of the show more to show less, adding a class to the paragraph so it shows paragraph visible. So this will grow and that fade will go away. And that will only apply to each one in the DOM. So there'll be multiple posts, but we only want to target the current one. So there's more to come with that bit later. But for now, we only have one on the page. So this should work as we want. But we need to target the same element we did before. Again, that's the one that we passed through. So there's JS show more, which will end up being our button. And that will end up being the target again. So we'll take the text content. We actually want to convert that to show less. So we can toggle that state. And then all in the same go, we want to use this keyword. So this is going to refer to utils. And you might wonder how the hell that works. Well, if we just console logged it right now, we could show you. So if I do that, we get an object in the console down here, and that's pretty much what we're going to refer to. You see all of our methods on that object, and that's really relating to what this is. So there's no name for it, but you can see everything that's involved with it. So that's kind of nice. That's the beauty of making these, so you can access them in other places if you want to. So using this, we're able to access our own methods on our, what I'm going to call a class, but even though it's not. So we're able to do that and target these functions that will manipulate the stuff we want to manipulate. So this will end up being a little quick run through of a remove class. So we're targeting this function. We're going to pass in our element, which will be the excerpt itself, which is what we're passing through. You'll see where that comes from in a second. So we're going to do excerpt. And then we'll toggle the class excerpt hidden, or remove it, excuse me. And then we'll do the same, but we're going to also add a class when we remove the other one, since one's already there by default. So that's why we have to remove the first one. So we'll do excerpt visible. Cool. So else, we need to make sure if it's already show less, we need to toggle it the opposite way. So once we toggle it open, we need a way to close it again. So we just do the inverse. So we'll do element text content equals show more. So a single equal sign means you're assigning it that. If you do double, it's comparative. So it's like checking if it is that. Triple has got to be really strict in terms of what it is. So I could get into more of that later, but that's just kind of a one-on-one there. So then we'll do, like I said, the inverse. So again, we'll refer to our utils object. We'll get the remove class, excerpt, and then the first one will be visible this time. You're wondering where excerpt comes from. I'll show you that in a second. It's another object we're going to create to kind of deal with this actual excerpt widget kind of thing. So maybe we reuse it even in other places. So this will be excerpt hidden. Cool. So that's the basis. I'm going to get rid of this line. We don't need it for now. But we are going to create another object now, like I just mentioned. We'll actually refer to this object and the other object. So that's the cool thing too, is you can share things between each other, especially if you import them or do whatever you want inside a file that would make it more reusable later. So const, we'll call this excerpt widget. Another object, so bracket notation here, or curly braces, excuse me. And it's just going to have a single method for now that I'm going to call show more. So we'll be calling this explicitly coming up. Maybe there's more that you'll want to add to this later that does different things for show more. Maybe it shows more vertically or horizontally. Maybe there's different methods to control stuff like that. You never know. So it's good to just kind of keep it open-ended. And then we're going to have a couple arguments we'll pass through. So we're going to get all the show more links, since there's going to be multiple on the DOM. And then we're going to get all the excerpt, or we're going to get the actual excerpt target, which is going to be relative to the given block. So you'll see how that works in a second. So we'll create that function. And you can have a comma here. We're going to only have one there, so it's not a big deal if you don't. But then we need to actually pass in a variable to grab all the links based on what we pass in here. So this will be a query selector all. So it'll be links. We're going to get all of them like we normally would. That query selector all, and then we can use the actual argument as the input here. So show more links target. Cool. So then the actual brains of this thing will end up looking like we would normally do, just kind of off the cuff. So we'll take the show more links, which is what we're querying for here, and we'll do a for each loop function, get that link instance. So each one in a few of these, I'm going to go ahead and copy a couple more down. So we have more on the DOM. So now we have 3, I think. So 1, 2, 3. And then within each, we'll grab the excerpt based on the link itself. So this is where it gets a little maybe tricky. So we're going to grab the link. Then we're going to use what's known as previous element sibling, and I'll console log this in a second. I just want to get it typed. We're basically traversing the DOM in a dynamic way, so we don't have to explicitly target something. So what that'll end up being, if we do console.log link, This is how I basically troubleshoot my way through this stuff. It's definitely not just in my memory that this is what will end up being what I need. I usually do something like this, console log link first, go to my actual console in Firefox Developer Edition, or probably even Firefox. And then we'll do, just to get this initialized, this is what we'll end up having as our input. So JS show more, and then JS excerpt. Okay. So each show more, we're going to console log the link. Let me clear this out and explain a little bit. So here we're calling our object here, and we're actually calling the method show more, and then we're passing in these arguments here, which are going to be dynamic based on maybe whatever element in the future it's going to be. It'll have its own name, perhaps, whatever it is. But we're passing that through, and everything in here is dynamic. So whatever we pass in, it should still manage to work, assuming our markup is similar. So where this link is located kind of relates to where the excerpt is. So hopefully it's just after it. That would make the most sense, because then we could target the content block and then traverse down, which is what we're doing here. So the way to target, there we go. So we get each of them. We'll come back and deal with the other bit later, but within each in Firefox, you can do this where you expand everything. And this is how I figure out what I'm looking for. I usually just kind of look at all these and see what's close. And then I'll find, oh, okay, so here is the JS excerpt, but I need to target this explicitly, and I don't have a way to do so. So I actually need to go up one element to get the content div. And this is actually not what I envisioned, so that's interesting. So I get the previous element sibling is all I need here. So let me double check my work here. Oh, I see what I did wrong. So the P tag, the A tag should come after the divs here. Excuse me, guys. That's totally my bad. So each should come after the actual content div. Yeah. That's how I first coded it. If you want it to come right after the P tag, you'd probably do something more like this. But that's just kind of a caveat to how you mark up something, or maybe how it's generated in, say, WordPress or whatever it is you're using. So then we get the actual content div in the output you see here, which is what I normally thought would happen. So that from that we can query for this actual link, which is what I'm trying to target dynamically. So I can do query selector. I don't know if this will work, but we'll do JS. We can pass in this, which is what we're going to pass in right here, the excerpt, or excuse me, the show more. So that ends up being at the very end. Let me try this again. If we just console that, we get the excerpt we're after. So I think that should be right. Yeah, okay, so that should be what we're after. The actual excerpt itself is what we're going for. So let me toggle this. We'll get it there. We don't have one here for some reason, because I think I missed the div bit on the second one. Yeah, so we get 3 total, which is what we want. Sorry if that was confusing, but what I'm ending up doing is dynamically querying for the excerpt based on our link click. So for each link we get, we'll have the appropriate excerpt show and hide. Otherwise, we'll have all of them show and hide, which is what isn't what we want. So with that, we can finally call our utils.showMore and then pass in our link, which is the instance here, and then an excerpt, which is what we just defined as that const variable. So excerpt. So if all goes right, you see it shows and hides, and it's relative to that individual one. So not all of them will show and hide, which is perfect. So you could add animations and everything here, whatever you want to do. Typically, you'd add those on the class you're animating. So it's not something I'm worrying about right now. I just want you to understand how you can do this in a really reusable way at this point. Refactoring further could happen for sure. So all of this stuff could maybe be a toggle method, maybe that just is based on 2 classes. Maybe we don't have to deal with 2 classes. We just do 1. This might need to be more granular, so not so explicit in the sense of what it does. Maybe we just have a class method that actually toggles something and that's all it does. And make it responsible for like one thing, you know, and that makes it more reusable and easier for other developers to understand down the road too. So the ES6 way would be to maybe do like an export default excerpt widget, and that would allow you to export this whole object into another file, and you could import it in another one as like import, if I could spell, excerpt, it's a freaky word, from whatever file you have, say typically like classes in, I don't know, some of the front end frameworks are capitalized, so maybe it's excerpt widget. Again, can't spell. And I don't even think you need like JS. It just knows that is the case. So something like that. That's not going to work in our case right now. But that would be a multi-file scenario. We'll get into some stuff like that coming up. But this is kind of just the way I would approach that right now. This is also kind of an non-ES6 way. There's some sugar going on here with some ES6 stuff like const and these arrow functions, but it's really ultimately this bit right here is possible today without any transpilers or anything. ES6 method might be more like add class and then just go to town. You don't need to write function, which is cool. I like that. It's cleaner, but I'm so used to this way that I go this route right now. And it's also stuff I have to code in day to day, so it's less to worry about transpiling down, compiling down, whatever you want to call it. But all in all, this is kind of how that works. So you see how things are more spread out, how more reusable they are. So if ever I want to access an add class or show class method, I know it was already written once, so all I need to do is refer to it. So I could always say, like, I don't know, query for some element, var ES6 const element, we'll just say body, whatever, and then say elm dot, or wait, utils dot add class, and then you pass in elm and then whatever class. So totally cool class, and our body class should update. So that just works. And of course you can access that within other objects. So very object oriented, which is kind of the goal of this video. The show and hide thing obviously is kind of basic, but it's still a usable thing that you need to kind of know. So I hope this helped you. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I feel like I did. If so, tell me. Feedback is good. But anyway, feel free to steal from this pin. I'll have it posted in both the video on YouTube and my blog. My blog, I kind of do a written format of this. If you would love, or if you would like, I have a newsletter that goes out weekly, or I try to go weekly, assuming I get a video out every new week. Basically, when I get a new video out, you'll get an email update. Also, YouTube is doing pretty well. Thank you so much if you've been a subscriber. If you're not, awesome if you would subscribe. More of these kinds of videos to come. I also I do a lot with Ruby on Rails if you're interested in that. A lot more to come with that as well. I'm working on that behind the scenes. I'll quit rambling. Thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you in the very next one. Thanks, guys. Peace.